Segment two, Gold and Black Live. One person here that I've just come to know, Ed Snyder, and one I've known a long time, and Jeff Ball joins us. Jeff, kind of consulting with, not kind of, he is consulting with us with Gold and Black, but this is a topic, Their Times in Indiana, a book that Ed Snyder has written, and working its way to press and being available to the rank and file. Jeff and I have seen advanced copies of it. Fascinating book on Indiana basketball history, but mainly totally in the words of some of the great figures that have played this game, and makes for a not only a great holiday gift, but really, if you like Indiana basketball, especially class basketball. Before that, before we got into multi-class basketball, the names here just kind of come right off the bone, so to speak. Some of the great names are in there. But Ed, welcome to the show, and talk about that and just the process and how you came up with this idea. A daunting one at the least, but to be able to herd the cats and be able to put a group of guys together that make that, and that list that's over your left shoulder that shows you how expansive that this list of former Indiana State, I always get Purdue in there, former Indiana basketball legends had a part of this.
Thanks for having me, Alan. It's great to join you and Jeff for a conversation. The idea for the book really came from a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine, Billy Shepard, who helped me a great deal with the book. And we talked about the fact that it was just time to do a book like this, to honor some of the great players that starred in Indiana, grew up in Indiana, played high school basketball in Indiana. These guys are getting up in age, but they still have great stories of what basketball was like and what it was like to grow up and learn the game in Indiana. And we just felt like now was the time to try to put this effort together.
Yeah. Jeff, as you had a chance to read through this, I thought one of the things you mentioned, and you're always great from a marketing perspective, you look at the 4 Ps, but also just some of the common themes that you saw. And you're obviously, you have your own Indiana sports lore, having played in a state championship in baseball, but love this topic is so up your alley, up my alley, in terms of we grew up at the right time for some of these folks. But talk about kind of some of those common themes throughout the book, but also just kind of what grasped you, or what did you grab from reading it?
Yeah, I felt like Ed wrote the book for me, really. I was definitely in the sweet spot of the target audience, I would say that. And first thing I was also going to mention, I think if we would just blind Ed, his voice sounds a lot like Steve Alford.
Yeah.
Commonalities to Steve Alford's pacing and tones, but after I finished up the book earlier this week, and I was just thinking a lot about those themes that you talked about, and I think there was, just a passion for the folks that are in the book. They just love to play, they just love to play the game, and could be a pickup game, it could be a one-on-one. They were making games up. They were, just playing, shooting free throws by themselves, and so I think there's a lot of power in that, especially they a lot of the subject talked about how it's different today because so much of it's organized. Yeah. And I think theirs was just spontaneous play. I thought there was also something around the peers, and oftentimes older, it seemed like a lot of them were playing up. They were freshmen playing on the varsity, and before that they were 6th graders playing on the 8th grade team. So I think they had some peers that really helped them along in their journeys to become, many of them. I think I counted 24 Mr. Basketballs of the 44. And I think they just had a pleasure, they just had a pleasure of playing. They loved playing high school basketball, and a lot of them had more pleasure playing high school basketball than they did, throughout the rest of their career. Many of their careers extended into the NBA, the ABA, Europe, et cetera. And I think their most pleasurable times were playing Indiana high school basketball.
Yeah.
So I think there's play, there's peers, there's pleasure. And then the last one I threw in there is kind of fun. I read the book selfishly. I kind of went with folks that I had seen in my younger years. So I started with Kent Benson because I'd seen him play in the old Berry Bowl. I went to Kyle Macy because I'd seen him play in Tiger Arena. So I didn't go chronologically, but as I'm reading through this, I love the old gyms. I kind of
Oh
lament
yeah.
Logan Sport tore down the old Berry Bowl. But just they talked about walking into the gym and smelling popcorn.
Yeah.
So that
That's
wasn't the
true.
fourth P, it was popcorn.
Yeah.
And as they're, that's one of the things I loved about Ed's book is that it paints such great mental pictures for me, reading through it. I can see the cul-de-sac and the little park that I think it was Jerry Seasting was living close to, and he could go walk out his back door, and he'd be on the court at the park within a matter of minutes. So just so much rich content in the book, and something like no other. I've got all kinds of Indiana high school basketball books from the Star and News, and I've got books from Bob Williams, and
Oh yeah.
this is it's really it's not showing up. There it is.
Yeah.
Ed's book I think is just totally different. When you think you thought you knew it all, there's a book like this that comes along.
And this is the cover of Ed's book. This when you guys order it, you'll see that as well. But yeah, it's so rich on that front. And I thought I wanted to ask, just from a strict publishing and editing standpoint, how much did you these guys, it's in their own words, and you've obviously it was very well written. It's flows well. How much editing did you have to do to make these stories work in the format that you wanted, or was it did they come in various shapes and sizes, so to speak?
It really wasn't that difficult for me to do. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do. I had a pretty good idea of, what I was trying to achieve. The backdrop that Jeff just described with the 4 Ps is absolutely brilliant. I mean, I tried my best to identify differences in the stories of all of the guys, so that the stories wouldn't all read the same. But at the same time, that backdrop of those 4 Ps really are the theme of what life was like in Indiana in the time period that I concentrated on, which was the early 50s through the early 90s. That's what life was like in Indiana. That's what it was like for the players and for the coaches and for the fans and all the guys like us. We all grew up and played basketball. And one of the things that I love to point out to the players as I was talking to them was that, at probably 15 years of age, their lives became different because they were that much better than we all were. But up until the time that they were 15, we were all the same kid. We were all, we may have grown up in Northern Indiana or Southern Indiana or Indianapolis or whatever, but in our neighborhoods, they were pretty much all the same, and we were all doing the same stuff. And I wanted that theme to kind of come through to the reader, so that as they were reading about these great players and how they spent their early lives in Indiana, they would recognize the similarity to what their lives were like. So, and I think that's really the connection that we all have to these guys and the times that they were playing high school ball.
Yeah, I thought an interesting common theme too is from Rick Mount's story of the tennis ball, which was written. I can remember reading that even when he was playing at Purdue and that. But so many guys had makeshift ways of being able to put a ball into a basket or into there may have been a couple of them where they were doing it with laundry baskets or things that they had at home that allowed them to compete. But the general theme, guys, and I was going to ask both of you, Jeff, as you read it too, being competitive. They were all pleasantly competitive people that, yes, they were talented, and most of them kind of realized that as they wrote it, that they were maybe at a different level. But the fact that they all started out in that 6th, 7th, 8th grade is kind of the same was an interesting storyline. Jeff, I'll start with you, but just in terms of that theme of competition and some of the great, there was nothing like Peru Logansport. That was a huge game, and you felt that level of competition and passion there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think part of it for me was just that back to they love to play and pickup games. The pickup games seemed like they were, as you said, Ed, I mean, we can kind of visualize our own
Sure.
lives. It's like, okay, I think the only time I ever used the phone was to call my friends to say, where's the game today? It could be,
Yeah.
depending upon the season, it could be
Mhm.
a home run derby, or it could be basketball, and these stories that Ed was able to uncover, you just got the sense that, okay, they're going to go to the park, and they love to play so much, they'll wait their turn, but just the way those pickup games were structured, winner stays.
Yeah.
Number one, I think they're young, their younger years, they're just trying to stay on the court. They're trying to get on the court and stay on the court.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes that was against 2, 3, 4, 5-year older players that I think
even
really
adults.
was kind of an
Yeah.
incubator for them to, just advance their skills. And then, as you said, Alan, their competitiveness, like, they wanted to find out themselves, are they good enough to play? And there's so many of those stories where I think you uncovered their light bulb moment. Ed was like, once I played in the Dust Bowl and, I hung around for a while, I figured I was getting pretty good at this game.
Yeah.
Well, Alan used the word organized, and that's a great word to talk about the difference between what basketball was like back then and what it's like now for young people. Everything is organized. Back then, the only organized basketball these guys played was their high school games.
Mhm.
AAU really didn't exist except for some of the guys, some of
At
the
the
young
end, yeah.
guys I had in the book. But for most of these guys, all the basketball they played was pickup basketball and the basketball that they organized. And I can tell you, to every last one of them, they wouldn't have changed a thing about that.
Well, even it's interesting in some of the later ones, Pat Graham being one that I remember from New Albany that ended up playing at Indiana, great player and a great, but he did play AAU, but he talked about how his passion about the decision he had to make. And it was a common theme in Indiana high school basketball where guys would sometimes switch schools for better opportunity, which Graham did, but he still had that small town mentality of what it took to get in the gym, set the chairs up, and do the same drills he's done year after year is an interesting thing. Of course, this happens to be a Purdue-centric show, and I think it's eight or nine. We'll include Kyle Macy as a Purdue guy. Of course, he's only spent 1 year at Purdue before going to Kentucky, but the Purdue theme there, obviously from Matt Painter to Dave Shellhouse on down the line, some great Rick Mount, obviously. But talk about the Purdue guys that you had a chance to talk to, and any common themes there.
Well, they were a great group of guys, as all the guys were that I spoke to. But I had a lot of fun with the Purdue guys. I'm a Purdue grad, and so that was a lot of fun for me to get to know these guys a little bit. And when I think about the guys that I talked to, obviously Coach Painter, this book and this project.
This is right up his alley too, though.
Oh my God.
So
right
much. Yeah. It is.
So he just loved, he is a basketball encyclopedia, and he loved to intertwine all the names. He's a name dropper. He knows everybody.
Oh, yeah, he does.
And within the context of his story of growing up and how much he loved basketball, that was great. Rick was a tremendous guy to talk to. I had a lot of fun with him. There are not people any finer than Billy Keller. He's just an amazing guy, and I really enjoyed the time that I got to spend, with him. And then, of course, I would also, comes to mind Troy Lewis.
Yeah,
and Troy was really a unique guy in that, as great a player as he became, as great as he was at Purdue, and he was a Mr. Basketball at Anderson, he was the epitome of a young boy growing up in Indiana who just wanted to make the high school team. And, when he finally did make it and was on the court to start a game for the Anderson Indians, I think that was probably the happiest day of his life. And so to hear him, tell that to you was really very rewarding. But he was just a reflection of all the guys and how much they loved basketball as youngsters.
Well, that's an interesting thing because you hear about Troy Lewis, who played, and many others, Steve Alford, others that played basketball at extremely high level, and I took them at their word that was the happy. They were really trying to make the varsity. That was the big deal. And the guys talking about being, I want to be a Marion Giant for the rest of my, I am a Marion Giant for the rest of my life. I think it may have been Dave Colescott's. And also, one of the things that's in the book, and I'll ask some other questions there. It wasn't all easy. I mean, Colescott writes very clearly about how his challenges with Bill Green, the legendary coach, and his dad, Jack Colescott, was a legendary Indiana coach. But just the struggle that some of these folks had, it could not have been easy from that standpoint to be able to deal. But Jeff, you also uncovered something which I thought came out pretty well in terms of guys, but like Kyle Macy not being able to mention the Berry Bowl. There still was that little notice of rivalry that was so intense. I mean, even in Lafayette, there were no West Lafayette kids in this book because nobody rose to this level, but the rivalry was just intense between, at least for West Side against Jeff or Logan Sport against Purdue or whatever that was. But talk about that theme as you see that some guys still hold that close to the vest.
Yeah. I think that talks a little bit about your competitiveness of how these players that really fueled their, their desire. Because they, like Ed said, I mean, they're number one, they want to make the high school team, and they typically, they may have a coach or older sibling or people in the neighborhood that they look up to that, they see them playing. And, the fact that it's the thing to do. At Purdue and Logansport. I mean, I think I've told both of you the story where I was fortunate enough to be friends in my Cub Scouts with a friend whose mom was the administrative assistant to the athletic director. So they would actually say, "Hey, Jeff, do you want to go to the sectionals with us?" So they would actually buy me a ticket. And if you didn't have a ticket to the Logansport sectional on Tuesday night, you weren't getting in. Yeah. So, just the fact that these players kind of felt that environment, they wanted to play for the Marion Giants or, the Peru Tigers, and then once they got on the team, I thought it was also interesting. Like they wanted to do well. They wanted to win, and to your, some of it was joyous. Some of them won state titles, some of them didn't get out of the sectional.
Yeah.
And, that was just, to me, the essence of the beauty of the high school tournament. Just the sectional was everything, and everything after the sectional was gravy. Most of them, I think to get into their junior, senior year, and they knew they were a good player, just becoming an all-star was everything. And the three of us have those memories of, getting the Sunday paper. It has Mr. Basketball. And then you're in anticipation, you wait for the next Sunday and you get the rest of the all-star team.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That was it, just those competitive, like I love the Southern Indiana stories where they got guys coming over from Louisville and they find parks to play in. And, it's just a magical time. I mean, you nailed the time period, Ed, with that 51 to 91, the heyday of the single class tournament. The pairing show with Hilliard Gates on TV.
Yeah.
The Ferris.
I really love this story. I really love the story that John Mengelt told along the lines of so where he said, I was a better football player than I was a basketball player. And of course, he grew up in the little town of Elwood, but he said, not very many people came to the football game, and I wanted to be somebody.
Yeah.
That's why I started working on basketball, because if you were a great basketball player at any high school in Indiana, you were somebody in your town.
Yeah, no doubt. And I thought it was interesting, and some of the guys also that end up being really good, guys that had great NBA careers that didn't make the Indiana All-Star team. We talked about the McLaughlins. Mengelt did. He got on late, as I recall. As a replacement. Is an interesting storyline again of achievement and of difficulty. And some of them talk about I think it was David Magley, who was a player in my era, the story of the cancer and his mother. They're very touching, but also you never know what people went through to get to where they got to. And here's a guy that had to endure a lot from that standpoint. I wanted to ask you too, Ed, on race. It was always an interesting theme because you had, wasn't necessarily the same in the state of Indiana for white kids and black kids in the 50s and 60s. You lead the book off with Larry Humes from Madison, right? Indiana Mr. Basketball. Mm-hmm. But talk about that, and again, the themes through some of the African American guys that are in the book that certainly addressed the issue, addressed some of the inequity, but also talked about their great experience and their love for the basketball and how they were able to achieve great things through that as well.
Certainly, there were several players that were affected by race and prejudice, certainly through the 50s and 60s, and then even somewhat through in the 70s. So I specifically asked them about that and how that affected them and their development, and they were all very candid, and I was happy to share that part of their journey and that part of who they were, and several of them. Of course, Larry's a great example of someone who had a coach. His name was Bud Ritter.
Yeah.
Who really believed in Larry as a very young person and really took him under his wing and helped him develop not only as a basketball player, but as a person, and always made sure that he was getting the help that he needed in school. And there were guys like that were there for these young kids, and who provided more than just being a basketball coach. They were real mentors, and that was a big part of how they developed and who they became in life. And they certainly, and there were several guys in the book that wanted to identify who those people were and honor them in their stories. So that's really a real neat part of some of the stories.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, and the mentoring part of this is such a big part of it seemed like just about everybody had somebody that went to bat for him. Rick Mount with Jim Rosensteel, who was his coach, but somebody else had to make, and of course, Mount's story about coaching change, and because I can't remember the whole deal, but it kind of came Rick's way, and Jim Rosensteel gets hired from Bluffton, comes to Lebanon, and the rest is history. It's just that role of having somebody there in that town to help you become great. It was a common theme throughout this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's part of, to me, what really makes Ed's book special are those stories that I've never read before. And I think the format and the way you interviewed the players, Ed, really helps those stories come out. I told you I started with Kent Benson. And he's got a story in there about, I think somebody's passing him by in study hall, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm dreaming about what I'm going to be when I grow up." It's like, well, it's going to take a little more than dreams. You gotta hit the books every once in a while if you want to make a career out of this basketball thing. So I just love those stories, because you always wonder, they're obviously great basketball players, but what else going on in their lives? Like you said, with Dave Magley, I was in tears reading his story, and just an amazing story, and so many human interest stories within the stories that you uncovered.
Yeah,
one of the ones. Yeah, go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
Well, I just want to say I'm glad you guys like the book so much, and it was a lot of fun to actually do and to talk to all these guys. I was very fortunate that they opened up to me and shared so much, but I was just like you guys when I heard those stories. As they were telling me, I wouldn't any sooner hang up the phone with them and start calling my friends and saying, you can't believe the story that I heard today, and they all really are neat stories. And I was lucky to have a group of 44 players who were willing to open up and share their journeys.
You don't want to start on book number 2 just yet, but there's 44 more. I mean, I know there's some that were there anybody in there that you really wanted to get that, for whatever reason, logistically, it didn't work out. And again, there are 44 more you could probably hit that would tell great stories as well.
Yeah, there's 200 more, Alan. It's amazing how many, great players grew up in the state of Indiana during that time period. It's amazing. But sure, there were guys that I had on my initial list that I would have liked to have gotten into the story. And we approached as many of those guys as we could. And for varying reasons, they chose not to participate. Guys like Bird and Oscar, their stories have been told so many times that I think they felt like, my story's been told. And I understand. What was really important and became apparent as I was maybe halfway through was it was more important to get a guy who really was engaged in what we were doing and really wanted to think back to what their time, what their lives were like growing up in Indiana, and wanted to share those things. And it meant something to them to be, every one of the guys who was in this book thanked me personally for being included. And that's amazing when a George McGinnis, looks you in the eyes and says, thank you for including me. So that was really what Billy and I were focused on, was trying to get the guys who really wanted to be part of this. And that's what makes the book hopefully a good read for everybody that checks it out.
When you get to be our ages, and I'm going to lop the 3 of us into a relatively similar age group, it becomes important, and it becomes so important. Even though you were famous, George McGinnis was as famous a guy as you're ever going to find in those days, and yet it becomes important that your legacy is there, and also that feeling of gratefulness that I think that it also comes out to so many of these guys that, hey, I really want to mention this teacher that made a big difference and that toiled in the wonderful world of public education for the most of them, and that to me shows so much of this, and it comes out to the beauty of this book. It really ends up being a beautiful book because of that. It's as Jeff had said, it's emotional, it's real. It's not just all about the baskets they made or the games they won. It's about their struggles as well, and how they made it to the other side. So, gentlemen, I have enjoyed this. We are going to do this again because we've gotten about a third of the way through things I'd like to discuss on this process. But Ed Snyder, the name of the book is Their Times in Indiana. Ed, I want you to say, because your publisher, you said that you've heard in the last 24 hours that tell us how they can order the book. And there is a guarantee that they'll get it by Christmas if they do so. But go right ahead.
So, Alan and Jeff, the book was written with the goal of raising money for charity. I am not going to keep a penny. No one gets any money for this book. All of the profits and the proceeds are going to go to the YMCAs of Indiana, and we're really thrilled.
How great is that? Yeah,
we have with the Y. A lot of the players grew up playing at Y, so we thought that was a great partner to have. And because of that, we're trying to maximize the amount of profit that we can make by the book. So there's only one place to buy it, and that's through our website, which I don't know if the people can see this or not, but it's theirtimesinIndiana.com. So if you go onto your browser and you type in www.theirtimesinIndiana.com, you'll come to our website. You'll very easily see there where you can order the book, and I have been informed by our publisher at Author House that anybody that orders a book by December 10th can expect to receive the book, whether they want it for themselves or they want to give it out as a gift, by Christmas. But that is the only place to get it. We're not selling it on Amazon. We can maximize the profits that we can earn and donate to the Y by simply selling them through our website. So that's what we're going to do.
And that's a great thing because it's such an important organization, but also the fact that, this story, this is going to help make a difference for other people. And we'll promote that also through goldenblack.com. Jeff Ball, last comment, anything else from your perspective here as we put a wrap on this segment? You have to order it. You won't be disappointed. Yeah. I think that's a true statement. Well said. And we'll do this again because, again, I definitely want to get back to this. We get into heavy tournament time basketball, and certainly it's going to be an interesting year for Purdue. It's going to be an interesting year for Indiana. gosh knows where it's going to take them. But all those kids that are playing at both those schools had high school careers that were important to them. A little different today than it was back in the day, but still some of that seeds of the 4 Ps that Jeff talked about is still well in play with the Braden Smiths of the world and the Zach Eady's and on down the line. It's all there for as part of that basketball journey. Guys, thanks again so much. We will take a 2-minute break and come back with Tom Dienhart as we'll talk about Purdue Northwestern tomorrow. I know that Ed and Jeff are on the edge of their seats thinking about what's going to happen to that game tomorrow afternoon. It is an important game as Purdue takes on the Wildcats at noon tomorrow. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes on Gold and Black Live.
Stay there.